Hey guys, it's Ian. Welcome to the Better Man podcast. Today's episode has a very special guest. This is Mark Devine. He is a retired U.S. Naval SEAL commander. He's an entrepreneur. He's an author. He's responsible for creating the SEAL Fit and Unbeatable Mind programs. He's also responsible for integrating yoga and meditation training into SEAL training. So this is the guy who comes from two different worlds and integrates them. And for that reason alone, this is a very special interview. During the conversation I had with him, you can tell that Mark is just a uniquely focused, calm human being. It's a testament to the meditation that he's done, to the military training that he's done. And I think that everybody, regardless of background or goals or whatever, would truly benefit from listening to this conversation. This was a very powerful conversation. It was very inspiring. And I hope it inspires you to be a better man. Hey guys, welcome back to the Better Man podcast. We've got Mark Devine here. Mark, just want to say I've known you for a long time, which you already know, but I'm excited to have this conversation with you. And I think this is a really unique perspective that we're bringing. So I hope lots of other people tune in as well.
Thanks, Dean. Appreciate it. Appreciate you having me on. Super nice to meet you. Here we are.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, so Mark Devine was a commander, retired commander. You retired with the rank of commander.
That's correct.
Of the Navy SEALs. And he was one of the first guys who really was trying to make yoga kind of more mainstream for men's fitness. And I actually found a book of his, I think 10 years ago, called Kokoro Yoga. And that was, I learned this later on, but that was essentially what the format that you were using to teach Navy SEALs yoga postures for their fitness. So that's how I first learned about you. And then, I had someone from your team reached out and said, "Hey, we've got Mark Devine. He's a blank. I'm like, I already know who Mark Devine is. Yes, I want him on the show." Yeah, but I think what's also really unique about you is you bring this unique perspective as a guy who is into spiritual work, but also someone who comes from a very you're in a military position and you're in the highest rankings of. I mean, the Navy SEALs are they're the best. So you have these two contrasting kind of identities, and I'm really curious about how you view other things from that. So yeah, I guess I'll kind of start there and turn it over to you and see where you want to go.
We'll see where spirit takes us. How about that?
Yeah.
Well, it's probably germane to state that I was a martial artist long before I found yoga. I found out later through my own inquiry that the martial arts and yoga share a rich history, right? A guy named Bodhidharma was a yogi who traveled through Tibet and ended up at the Shaolin monastery. And he taught the monks their meditation, which became Chan, which became Zen. But he also taught them how to defend themselves. And that became the Shaolin martial arts. So this guy was a yogi from, a yoga master, not stretchy bendy yogi, but, true yoga in the sense of the word from the Indian, Himalayas. But at any rate, so I was in New York, 21 years old, had just graduated from Colgate University, upstate New York. And I was following, my training and conditioning. Now, I don't mean physical training, although that was part of it, but like how I was conditioned by my family. And by my, the whole story of the time and place that I grew up, right? And people have to realize that the moment you open your eyes, your mind is being trained and conditioned, right? By your parents, by society, by school, by, church, etc. And so my training condition was you're going to go out and be successful in business. Mm-hmm. And we have a family business, by the way, for you. It's over 100 years old. And so you're going to go get this, an MBA. And I had a job with Coopers and Lybrand. I'm going to be a CPA and saw great training, MBA, CPA. It looks all really good. And then you can come home and, eventually run the family business. That's what Devines do. Mm. So I find myself at NYU Stern School of Business studying accounting of all things, which I had zero interest in, but I was doing it because that's the story, right? That was the story. Ended up transferring, got me MBA in finance, became a certified public accountant. But during the time, the most significant thing that happened to me, Dean, was I stumbled into this martial arts school. So I was an athlete already. I was a competitive swimmer, triathlete. I rode crew at college. And I think, I must have had lifetimes as a yogi because there was not a bone in my body that didn't think I would continue to move until the day I died. Right? Moving the body and staying fit and healthy and honoring this body for the capacity it had and for it being the vehicle for my soul was something that I just understood. And so while simultaneously I saw everyone around me in New York in that corporate ladder kind of rat race as pasty, fat, and getting sicker every day. And I just vowed never to be that. Mm-hmm. So I ran in the morning and went to gym at lunchtime and did a high intensity workout before we even knew what HIIT was. We were talking about 1985. And I was looking for something to do in the early evening before I went to night school. And that's where I found Seido karate, right? Which is a form of Japanese karate, a spinoff of Kokunsai. And just so happens the grandmaster was also a Zen teacher. And on Thursday nights after the black belt class, I stayed one night to watch, and they pulled out these little wooden benches, and about 10 of the senior black belts sat down and started meditating. And I was like, wow, what is that? And they said, well, that's Zen. I said, well, can I join? They said, well, you have to talk to Nakamura. But before you do that, read this book by a guy named Suzuki. It's called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. So I went to the library, got the book, and it kind of popped my brain because it was talking about all these spiritual principles, but in language that was not religious. It was not anything that I'd ever come across, right?
Did you grow up in the church?
Yes and no. Episcopalian, which is kind of like Catholic super light. Yeah. My mom was pretty devout. We would go on Sundays. I went to the school and everything. But I never really latched onto it, right? Mm-hmm. I thought a lot of the stories were kind of silly, and I believed in the whole messaging of Jesus and everything, but I didn't believe in the church necessarily.
But you kind of had, that was your first exposure to spiritual principles, but it was within that framework that was kind of not accessible or not understandable. So now you have this. It was not accessible to me.
Correct. I thought the stories were a little silly. I didn't believe in this whole idea of needing this intermediary. I was very in touch with myself in certain ways because of my time in nature. You got to understand, I grew up in a very small area in upstate New York. And this is the 60s. So we didn't have TV. We didn't have social media. We didn't have iPhones. And I spent practically every waking hour outside. And oftentimes I was alone. And we had a house on Lake Placid where they had the Olympics. And we'd spend our entire summers there. And so I was always ramming around the woods or in and on and under the lake. And I developed a real capacity to be comfortable in stillness and alone. And I felt like a real reverence for nature, like God was there everywhere. I don't think I articulated it that way until much later when I started meditating with Nakamura at the Seido place. Because when I would sit down on that bench and start meditating under Zen, I felt the same energy, right? Of like deep connection to everything. So I think that's one of the reasons that why I succeeded in the meditative path as opposed to like finding it through a traditional religious path. And the book used language that was much more about like human potential. And this is all about training the mind, right? It's, spiritual capacity, evolution, satori or enlightenment. It was something that you could strive for or attain if you, if the circumstances were right and if you trained for it, right? That's very different, right? Than having an intermediary and just, hoping and praying. It gives you the responsibility back. And so now I was like, okay, I can actually do something about this. And I want to develop myself, not just physically, but also mentally and spiritually. And later on, I learned emotionally had to be part of that. And I had a really kind of a challenging emotional upbringing because my father was pretty abusive and, rager, alcoholic. So I had to, do a lot of the trauma work and the emotional healing there. So that's how I got into like Zen later on, learning that Zen and yoga are like literally mean the same exact thing. Reintegration, whole mind coming together, right? Integration of mind, body, and spirit. So my, in the martial arts was like the movement practice. That's like the asana. And then there was breath work, the pranayama. And then there was the meditation, which was concentration, right? Meditation. Pratyahara, also sensory development, ultimately leading to states of samadhi, which I 100% experienced within about 2 years of taking up the training and doing it every day. About 20 minutes of practice every morning after my run, longer practices on the evening and the weekend. And then we would do these 4-day, 5-day retreats at the Zen Mountain Monastery in upstate New York. I could actually see before my very eyes, my mind transforming and changing, right? Now, mind you, Dean, of course, I was 21, 22, 23, so my brain was actually still developing. This is why any of your younger listeners, if you can really take a serious look at meditation at that age, it can transform your life very quickly because your brain is already going through very rapid changes and growth, and now you're directing that growth. You're not letting it happened randomly or being directed necessarily alone by the external inputs or your academic training. So you're taking a much more multidimensional approach to developing the mind. And that's what happened to me. And I could describe the process later on, but it led to periods of deep peace, like what Shich Mahal would call flow, right? Where everything kind of came together and everything felt really rich and almost electric around me. And, I feel like I'm walking about an inch off the ground when I would leave the meditation. And in those moments of timeless reality, sometimes it would last just a moment, sometimes for 10 or 15 minutes. I would not always, but I would often and increasingly come back with some information or knowingness that I didn't really know before. And one of the things that kept coming back to me was this sense that I was a warrior, that I was meant to be a warrior. Right? So you might liken this to like your soul's voice, right? Or whisper. The silence I was able to kind of just be still enough to hear my calling, I guess, if you will. So that led to kind of an early existential crisis, right? So I was waking up to who I was meant to be, why I'm here on this planet, but I was in complete misalignment with that. Running, barreling down the road toward the money, toward the family business, toward, what would have been a disaster for me. But I probably wouldn't have discovered, or the disaster would have been like a freight train, heading toward a cliff over a 20-year period. And I would have been in my 40s like so many other guys wondering what the hell happened and why am I so miserable and right, living this life of quiet desperation and not even understanding that's because I would have missed my calling. I think that's one of the biggest sources of angst in the world, especially among men, because there's so many, we just get funneled into these career paths that really might have nothing to do with who we are and what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to serve. So I feel very grateful that I found Zen and it slowed me down and parked me on a little wooden bench for 20 minutes or half an hour every day so I could slow down. My mind could clear, like the dust settling in a fishbowl. And I could hear that calling, the voice of the calling to be a warrior. So I started to ask better questions. Okay, if I'm not supposed to do that and I'm supposed to be a warrior, then how? What does that look like? I certainly didn't grow up in a military family. My father had a pretty strong negative opinion toward the military, right? It was a place that you went if you had no other options, right? Basically, if you're a loser, in his words. So it was never discussed. It's not like I was able to call my dad and, ask him about this. He would have left me. He would have laughed me out of the room and judged me. But anyways, when you get close to your calling, when you start asking the right questions, then the universe does something magical. It starts to provide you answers. Right? That's where the saying, when the teachers or the student's ready, the teacher appears. The student's asking the right questions. And so the teacher appears, the universe, right? It's like we live in unity consciousness that has the appearance of multiplicity of separation. And it will always be experienced as separation unless you start to slow down and connect with your heart and to start asking better questions. And then suddenly the universe starts to look like a silent partner, providing you the exact support when you need it in the form of a message or a person showing up in your life, right? And so my message was, I was walking home from school one night, and I walked past just randomly a Navy recruiting office, and I saw a poster. I didn't even know it was a recruiting office, but I just saw a poster, and the title of the poster was "Be Someone Special." And it didn't say anything about the SEALs, but it was images of Navy SEALs doing wickedly cool stuff for me, right? Mm-hmm. Free fall, parachuting, locking out of a submarine in the ocean in the middle of the night, that kind of stuff. And I remember just staring at that poster and said, that's how I'm supposed to be a warrior. It was very inspiring to me. And I knew that I was badass and hard to get in and hard training, the hardest in the world, because I had heard of the SEALs. And I just immediately knew that's it. That's how I'm supposed to serve as a warrior.
Can I go back to when you were first starting to meditate? And can you maybe talk me through what was your experience as you were starting to meditate? And because everyone thinks that meditation is about, just don't have any thoughts, right? Everyone has misconceptions about what meditation is. Can you walk me through what your early meditations were like kind of bridging the gap between, okay, I'm starting out as a beginner to meditation, and then, eventually what does meditation look like as you get more and more advanced?
Sure. It's a great question. So for me, all I needed to do was follow the instructions. And so it's helpful as a beginner to have a good set of instructions, right? So that's what a system like Zen or Tibetan Buddhism, or, you don't find it much in yoga in the West because the systematic teaching of meditation didn't really come with yoga to the United States, right? You find it a little bit like through Self-Realization Fellowship, which is Paramahansa Yogananda, and a couple others, but generally those are characterized as not necessarily yoga, but as mysticism or something. At any rate, so the simple beginner practice in Zen starts because it's very stripped down, focused path. There's a multitude of paths, but the two primary meditative paths are concentration, which later will open up to mindful awareness. I'll explain how that works and what happened to me, or mindfulness. And that's at least how it's been taught in the United States. And then people also throw in there like guided visualization, which is not a meditation. That's really a concentration. Or you could just put it in a separate bucket even. Or like TM is largely a concentration mantra practice, though they don't characterize it as that. They call it a monitoring practice. But monitoring and mindfulness are very close. Again, I can probably get pushback from a TM person, but I've practiced all of them. And TM uses a mantra, so it's more of a mantra. At any rate, so back to your original question, Zen and Nakamura said, okay, here's your instructions. You're going to do nostril breathing, right? So there's some breath control work in here, and you're going to slow your breathing down, and you're going to slowly inhale to roughly a count of 5, and then you're going to slowly exhale through your nose to a count of 5. Deep diaphragmatic belly breathing, right? So you're getting what I now call arousal control through the massage of the vagus nerve. And you're not going to think of anything while you do that. You're just going to concentrate on that inhale and that exhale. And when you're done with that, you're going to count 1. And then you're going to do it again. And your goal is to not think of anything. So just focus. So you made a comment earlier, right? People think meditation is just not thinking or to still the thoughts. That's a long-term outcome of the practice, but it's not something you can actually do as a practice. So it's kind of like we call the descriptive-prescriptive fallacy, right? To prescribe sitting down and not thinking is going to doom someone to failure. But to describe the experience of having long periods of silence absent of thought, that's definitely possible, because that's just the outcome of a long period of practice. So instead of trying not to think, what you do is you try to think of just one thing. You hold your attention on one thing, and that one thing is the inhale and the exhale, and count 1, right? It's extraordinarily hard because your mind immediately wants to start, it gets bored, right? We're trained to be distractible and distracted all the time, and bored if we're sitting doing nothing. And certainly inhaling and exhaling, counting 1 looks a lot like nothing to your ego, right? To your ego mind.
It's just 1. So you inhale and you're not counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Inhale, exhale 1. Inhale, exhale 2.
Oh, there's 2. Okay. I thought you just said 1 over and over again.
No, not over. So I could have been more clear, but the goal was to get to 10.
Okay.
Dean, it literally took me like 6 months before I got even close to 10.
Without thinking of other stuff.
Thinking,
or getting,
yes. Right.
Okay.
Without getting distracted or without thinking. And so in the beginning, like most people, I tricked myself. I would go inhale, exhale 1, inhale, like, I'm doing pretty good. And I would get to 10. I'm like, that's pretty easy. And it took maybe a week or 2 before I realized, I'm actually thinking the entire time.
Yeah.
Right. I've got this recursive dialogue going on, but so we learn quickly that we can also split our attention. We can hold our attention on the inhale, exhale 1 and the inhale, exhale 2, counting the 10 while simultaneously our mind is running on, right?
Yeah. So that's been my experience with meditation. Is I'm usually good for a few breaths, and then I start thinking about how to talk about meditation on social media. Right. How do I describe this to people?
Right.
Yeah. I'm like, oh crap, I'm doing that thing again. Okay, go back to breathing.
The key it's just like with fitness, or when I first started Ashtanga yoga, man, I was a soup sandwich. You know what I mean? I practically lost control of my body. It was so hard. And just through daily repetition, over the course of 1.5 to 2 years, I could finally complete the first series and move on to the second series. So, or learning how to Olympic, or anything really, like any physical training thing like that requires the mastery of complex movements like yoga or Tai Chi or the martial arts. It's just repetition. So meditation is the same thing. You're training your brain, and you have to just get the reps in. And over time, you begin to notice the differences, begin to notice the effects of the meditation. But it's pretty subtle with meditation, and we're not taught really well what to look for. So back to why it's also helpful to have a guide or a teacher that you respect is if the teacher says, just show up and sit and do the work and the results will come, then you're more likely to just show up and sit and do the work and, hope the results will come even though you may not have evidence of it early on. Whereas if you try to do it on your own and you're just using an app like Headspace, like it's very easy to trick yourself that you suck at it or that it doesn't work for you, right? You're different somehow. And so most people get distracted and quit, right? But I really respected this Nakamura. He was a real father figure for me, total contrast to my biological father. And so I revered this guy. I almost didn't want to let him down. And so I stuck with it. And I think that plus my familiarity with being alone in nature and already having, some ability to kind of be still and not get bored with it, led to some great success. And so, but it wasn't quick by any stretch of the imagination. Like I said, it took me about 6 months to where I can legitimately do the practice as prescribed and get close to 10 or if not 10. And then I would start to, the process for me, and this is where I made a comment earlier that concentration training, I think, especially for Westerners, should be the prerequisite. And not only that, but a healthy physical body is as a prerequisite. This is why I think yoga is such a profoundly valuable tool, because your body is going to get really healthy, multidimensionally healthy, inside and out, while you're also really stabilizing your mind through the breath practices, both of which set the conditions for you to be able to be very successful and effective at meditation, with your meditation. But if your body's out of shape and your brain is out of shape, and it's going to be operating at a high beta or gamma all the time, and which is going to lead to the feelings of anxiety and racing thoughts, you're never going to succeed if you just sit down and try to meditate. So getting the body healthy, this is why in the 8-limb system of yoga, after the yamas and niyamas, which are the ethical principles and the disciplines, right, then came asana, which is the physical practice, the movement practice. And you would, especially the younger and newer people coming to the traditions would spend a lot of time there just to get the body ready to sit and meditate. And then after asana came pranayama, breath work, to stabilize the mind and help you turn your attention inward. And then pratyahara, which was the, sensory awareness and turning, listening to your inner senses instead of just the outer. Mm-hmm. And then came concentration training. Just like in Zen, concentration came before meditation. So there is a sequencing to this, but I had stumbled upon martial arts with Zen, had the exact same sequences: physical training through karate and breath work through the karate and movement, and an ethical foundation through the warrior disciplines of karate, is no different than yamas and niyamas. And then we got into concentration, and that's where they stopped. At least that's where the training I got stopped. But what happened, Dean, was after a chunk of time, right, by 6 months, between 6 and 9 months, or 6 months and a year, I had gotten really good at that attention control and concentration where I could really, really dial it in. And it took effort, almost like I remember almost breaking a sweat sometimes. Like, because you're really focusing on that one thing. That's efforting. Mm-hmm. And efforting will only get you so far in meditation, but it's necessary. Like I said, it's necessary prerequisite to what happens next. So with all that effort, it starts to become, your mind gets more focused, right? You get really focused. It's great for getting shit done, right? Because you're gathering up all the energy that you used to throw out like a floodlight on those 60,000 thoughts that you have every day. But now you're learning to really, really narrow it. So your mind's becoming more like a flashlight or a laser beam even. You cut through things really well and really get deep and do deep work and understanding. But with that level of concentrated effort, it also becomes very clear when your mind pops off of that and starts thinking again. And so you're able to be like, oh, now I'm thinking, I can bring it back really quickly. And so your ability to hold your attention gets better, and your concentration gets better, and your observation that you've split your attention gets better. And so then what naturally happened with me is that I started to ask, oh, well, this is interesting, because there's part of me that's over here thinking, And there's part of me that's concentrating, but there's part of me that is just aware of both, observing both. Huh. Like, that's really wild. Like, my brain is like now split, or there's three things going on. Apparently, there's thinking, there's concentrating on one thing, and then there's the observation of both of those things happening. And so I started to really just sit with that observer. Mm-hmm. And what happened was I started to see that the thoughts that kept coming up were really recursive and repetitive, looping. Mm-hmm. A lot of them, fear-based, rumination, coulda, shoulda, wouldas. And they were all colored by that conditioning I talked about of who Mark was from, birth up until this point in time. Mm-hmm. And I could see all that, like as if I was watching a movie. And yet I could also see very clearly, or experience very clearly, that wasn't who I was, because I was watching.
So you had a very clear experience that was different from your true self or your higher self.
Yes, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. I call it awareness.
Awareness.
And I use the term witness when I teach it. So to really try to, you first kind of get a taste of the witness, and I can guide people to that, because it's that aspect of you that just actually knows that you're alive, feels the aliveness. The I amness is another term that's used, like I am, witness. And everything else is thought. And that thought has a certain quality to it based upon your training and conditioning, based upon the world you've experienced, your beliefs, your perceptions. So I quite naturally opened up into this mindful awareness that, I am not my thoughts. Thoughts happen, but I am not my thoughts. So if I'm not my thoughts, then I can change them. And I don't mean just like the statement of changing your mind. I mean like literally change the very nature of what you believe to be true about yourself, your identity. So combining that insight with this growing sensation I had that I was meant to be a warrior, I was like, okay, if I am not my thoughts and I'm getting these messages that I'm supposed to be a warrior, then I need to reconstruct my identity to start to perceive and believe that I'm a warrior. So the martial arts were already chipping away at that, right? I was getting a lot of great, hand-to-hand combat training, the total warrior, right? Mind, body, spirit that you think of like in a samurai. That was the training I was going through. And I trained hard, 6 days a week. And I started to read everything I could about special operations. And, there wasn't a ton back in the 80s, but, there was enough. Books by SEALs written, from Vietnam and other things. And I started to visualize myself as a Navy SEAL trainee. I had a video, which was also called Be Someone Special, which was a Navy recruiting video, which is funny that they would even have it, because the SEALs were a secret organization at the time. And the recruiters tried to, they warned me. They told me not to try because it's too hard to get into, especially for a civilian like me. The recruits all came from, seasoned military vets in the Navy or Marine Corps or Army even. So I began to retrain my mind, in other words, and recondition it. And that required me to get very clear on, who I believed that I was. And I developed, lists and boiled it down into pretty brief statements, right? So I used 3 kind of anchors. What is my purpose? I was like, my purpose is to be a warrior. So I can serve, right? I can serve my country and ultimately humanity. And then what am I passionate about, right? And so I had to get clear about what my likes and dislikes were. And what I found there is I didn't grow up with the ability to really ask that question or think about it. I was kind of like told what to think, which leads to codependence. It happens pretty frequently in if not direct result of growing up in a dysfunctional family. So I had to get clear, starting with what I don't like. And what I realized is I don't like practically anything about the lifestyle I've chosen, right? Except for the martial arts. I didn't like the people I was working with. I didn't like the work I was doing. I didn't like living in New York. I didn't like being inside all the time. I didn't like wearing a suit. I didn't even really care about the money. So I was basically living a lie, and that practice and journaling on this and really getting clear about what I didn't like exposed that to me. So then I started to ask, what do I like? And that's when I started to say, well, I really like training. I like meditating. I like being outside. I like adventure. I like risk. I love fitness. Okay. And then I had to ask, what are my principles? What do I value, in other words? And in a similar thing, I realized I didn't value money. I didn't value the things that I was doing, even though I was doing them to look good. So I saw that, right, I was trading my future for someone else's opinion of me. Mm-hmm. And that's when I said, I'm not going to do that any longer, right? I don't care what my parents think about me if I leave. I don't care what my friends think about me. I don't care what my peers think about me if I turn away from the money, because it's not their life. This is my life. So that's the power of opening up to this mindful awareness, when you can see your life as a drama, a story, a play. And you say, well, I'm a participant in that play, but I'm also the author of the play, and I'm sitting in the audience watching it. So if it's entertaining and you love the outcome, great. Just refine it, keep it going. But if you're watching that play and you see that the character you're playing is in a slow-moving train wreck, then you might want to rebuild the script, right, in real time, so that the play has a different direction to it, right? Act 2 is suddenly, Mark's not a CPA and MBA earning a ton of money, but Act 2 is Mark is now a world-class elite Navy SEAL officer, right? Mm-hmm. Doing adventurous and dangerous things and serving humanity and serving his country.
Yeah.
So that's the story. I rewrote the identity, build upon those principles and my passion and my purpose. And I was off to the races. In November of 1989, I got my MBA from Stern. I got my CPA from New York. I got my black belt from Nakamura, and I walked away from it all to go to Officer Candidate School and then on to SEAL training in 1990. Meditation was every bit as responsible for that as I was, right? I mean, mm-hmm. that was the tool. And the process and what it did to my brain was extraordinary. And when I went to SEAL training, my class number 170, we had 185 hardcore students in it. And by the end of the training, 6 months later, we had 19, and I was number 1 graduate. Wow. And the 6 other guys who kind of formed up with me in the first couple of weeks, we called a boat crew. They were standing there with me because I taught them these basic, simple skills about how to stay calm in the midst of all this stress, right? Through breath control training. This is where, when I started SEAL Fit, I used a process called box breathing, which is just controlled breathing, and so I taught them box breathing, and then I taught them mental management and how to, make sure that we all had a very positive internal dialogue to ourselves as well as to each other. Because I had learned that through karate, through the fighting of karate, that if you start talking to yourself negatively or thinking, negative thoughts, then that you lose every time. So I learned the power of your thoughts. Your thoughts shape your reality, and your thoughts are sending signals to your body all the time. And so negative thoughts weaken you and positive thoughts strengthen you. So I taught them that, and we practiced that. And I taught them the visualization practice. I said, this is really helpful for me. we got to visualize the win. So what's the win like? It looks like us all graduating, together. And so we would talk about that and we would visualize it. And then anytime we had a hard evolution, we were like, let's talk, what does the win look like? Let's get a clear picture so we're all shooting for the same thing, right? And then I also taught them how to see. Arousal control is the ability to be calm, but if you've got nonstop stress and chaos coming at you, we call it VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. SEAL training is basically training you to navigate VUCA. And if you can't do it, you're out. And so I taught them basically how to be like kind of Neo in the Matrix. This is well before the movie was out, to where, if an instructor starts screaming something at you, people immediately take that on and their thoughts and emotions get completely wrapped up and engaged, and they lose autonomy. They lose control. And then they start spinning out of control, and then their thoughts start going negative. Well, I can't do this. This is crazy. And then they forget why they're there and they quit. And so I taught them that those words are like, you can stop them in midair. You can put this invisible force field up, and you might hear words and you might feel them coming at you, but you don't engage with them, right? You stay quiet inside, doing your breathing and managing your mind. And then together as a team, we're going to pause and we're going to, figure out what is actually being said. Or as an individual in that scenario, you're able to create a space between the stimulus and your response and formulate a productive response. And that we got really good at that, right? To where it was nearly instantaneous. So we were always acting and responding better than the other boat crews and the other, people in our class because of these skills. Later on, when I got off active duty, after a couple other entrepreneurial endeavors, I decided I really wanted to go back and teach these skills to the SEALs. And so that's why I started SEAL Fit. And my first real foray into trying to develop these things was I developed a 30-day academy. Imagine like an American Shaolin Academy. So students would come and live with me at my Encinitas Training Center for 30 days at a time. We've put them up, we've fed them. We trained from 4:30 to 5 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. The graduation ceremony after 30 days was 50 hours of nonstop training, no sleep. And that was to simulate Hell Week, Navy SEAL Hell Week. And it was such an incredibly intense and creative time for me, because then you'll appreciate this as someone who has to design yoga and different programs. Like, here I am, I'm responsible for these warriors, all of them fit, for 30 days. So I need the curriculum. I need to innovate. It needs to be effective because these guys are going to go off into the hardest training in the world, Navy SEAL training or Special Forces or SAS. And I know what success looks like because I'd seen that in folks like Nakamura and in my actual SEAL training, where the most elite warriors had this capacity that I was talking about, either naturally or they, had some mentors like I did, but it was a very small percentage because the SEALs didn't teach these things. They do now as a result of our work at SEAL Fit, but they didn't back then. So I built a physical training regimen, which was called SEAL Fit, which became a best-selling book called 8 Weeks to SEAL Fit. And I combined, strength training and durability training and high-intensity interval training and stamina work and stability and, the things that the SEALs would need. And within the durability bucket, I used yoga, asana, and breath work. But what I found after, maybe like the first session was that I had to teach it differently because these young men, mind you, this is again 2006-ish timeframe now when I started that.
Mm.
And even back then, like yoga was not anywhere near as ubiquitous as it is now, especially amongst men. They just didn't want to touch it. And so I call it taking the foo out of the kung fu. I had to like turn it into drills, and I had to lace it with warrior language, and I had to show that it could be extremely effective as a workout or as a complement to a workout, right? And so I created something called warrior yoga. And later on, I had to change the name because there was a dude out there who had a program called Warrior Yoga, and he wouldn't license it to me or sell it to me.
Yeah, you couldn't just explain to him like, no, I am the warrior. You are not the warrior. Like, just give it to me, or
sure. Yeah, that's right.
I'll take care of it.
He wouldn't do it. So that's where Kokoro Yoga, and Kokoro, I was really intrigued with that word because it meant merging heart and mind into your actions, or whole mind. So it's so Kokoro and Zen and yoga in terms of what it means are very, very similar. And I launched a program, and my daughter by that time, my stepdaughter was a yoga instructor, and so she helped me, and we ended up launching a whole program called Kokoro Yoga, which also, as you mentioned earlier, had a book by St. Martin's, and that became a whole program in and of itself. But initially, I was just using it to help the SEALs. It was a bucket for me to like bring them these skills, mindfulness, movement, concentration, breath work, visualization. So we were training it all in these 30-day academies. And then later on, after doing this for a few years, I had more and more civilians come and say, "Hey, listen, we want to do this training, but I'm not a military guy. Excuse me, do you still offer it for us?" And I said, "I can." And so that's where I built the program called Unbeatable Mind, which is it's kind of like an American yoga, but you choose the asana, you choose the movement practice. It's not prescriptive. Right. It's recommended. Right. So what was prescriptive was a set of practices that would lead to your own evolution really quickly, accelerated development. So Unbeatable Mind became accelerated vertical development, meaning that you're going to change the nature of your perceptions and your reality and who you believe you are through what I call the 5 mountains: physical, mental, emotional, intuitional, and spiritual development. And we would train them all together, not as separate things, but as different aspects of your body, mind, that are just different experiences of the same thing. And that became a book. Mm-hmm. I self-published that one. Actually earned way more money with that book than any of the others because it's self-publishing. You keep 75% of the royalties. Anyway, it's been an incredible journey. Great thing for me is, I'm sure your love as a teacher, like we share that if you're not practicing as a teacher, then you're not a legitimate teacher. So I've never stopped practicing. Every day, 20 minutes of asana, breath work, meditation, visualization, and a hardcore workout. Today I did it. I'm 62 years old, never going to change. I'll be doing it when I'm 152. It's just who I am, right? And so for your audience, your guys, like you just start training, and at first, it's crawl, walk, run. First it's hard, and then it gets easier, and then it becomes joyful, and then it just becomes who you are. And it gets a lot easier when you stop thinking, "Oh, I've got to do my breath work over here, and then I've got to do my workout over here, and then I've got to do my yoga over here, and then I've got to do my spiritual work with my Bible study or church over there." And you start to bring them all together. Every training session you're training your body, your mind, and your spirit. And so, the way I taught in the SEALs, like every session, every hardcore workout, we start with meditation, with breath work, box breathing, with visualization and intention, prayer, if you will, for some of them. And then we would practice mindful movement or mindfulness. So treating, even kettlebell swings like an asana, like very, very thoughtful about every movement, about your stance, about your hip movement, the posture, alignment, teaching them that every movement starts with intention and then with the breath and then with the movement of the spine and then your core and then the extremities. And so every time we train, you feel this evolutionary movement because you're not just training the body, you're training the body, the mind, you're integrating, right? And that has the effect of greatly accelerating your journey to self-awareness. So.
Beautiful. Wow. It's
and all
awesome,
that from a Navy SEAL commander,
Right. I mean,
well, you saw there's a whole backdrop to that, right? I was more than that when I went into the SEALs. The SEALs provided a lot. But even that, I think it was like all the extra training, the way I approached it, right? Mm-hmm. With that mindfulness and with that awareness is why that, I think that it amped up the effect on me because the SEALs already train your mind pretty well. Like some extraordinary guys, who just get even more extraordinary as a result of the intensity level of the, physical and mental training that the SEALs put you through. So if you can add to that, like they are now finally doing, if you add to that, the visualization, breath work, mindfulness, positivity, all that, it's like development on steroids.
Yeah. Well, I have a ton of other questions, but we're pretty much out of time. So I'm going to go, we're going to do,
we'll have to do this again sometime.
We're doing another one. We've got a follow-up one planned, which is awesome. And I really want to talk more about, since this is a big exploration just on men's health overall,
sure.
and men's self-improvement, I really want to talk more about kind of, being in this, being in the military, being exposed to kind of hyper-masculinity, ideas that are ultimately self-destructive, and I think missing the point of what it means to be a man. Balancing that with, hey, I've got a balanced. I feel like you have a more balanced approach,
right?
That is probably better. Which is kind of the idea behind the Better Man podcast. Yeah. There's a better way to be better.
Can I address this real quick, Gene? Real quick.
Yeah, let's do it. It's a preview for the full conversation.
Yeah, preview. So most people would have heard of my teammates, Jocko and Goggins.
Mm-hmm.
Great guys. I know them both. I highly respect Jocko as like one of the best warriors our nation has ever produced. And Jocko's a jiu-jitsu guy, and I think that he is much more balanced along the way we're talking about, but the image he projects is still kind of like, just get it done.
Yeah.
Harder is better. He probably wouldn't disagree with that. Goggins is full on radically unbalanced in that regard, right? Go harder, longer, suck it up, buttercup. You're capable of 40 times more. And he lives that life, but there's no balance there. And right, it's like the yin yang. You got to have balance, or else the universe will find it for you, usually in the form of injury or breakdown, right? When I train the SEALs, I would use a metaphor. I had to use metaphors and like stories, right? Those are the best way to teach, especially young men. So I would say, hey, everyone wants to be like freaking tough guy, the mighty oak, right? It looks good. You can go pump the pig and put some huge muscles on, but you also have to be extremely flexible and durable and relax And the SEALs, the Marine Corps has a term called Semper Fi, which means always faithful. Well, the SEALs jokingly use Semper Gumby, and that means always flexible. If you can't find a way, make a way. But if you're so stuck on yourself and you think that you've got to have all the answers, you're that rigid, mighty oak, right? You're going to get your ass handed to you as a SEAL. You got to be really flexible and pliable and adaptable and bendy. You know what I mean? That's why yoga is so good for SEALs, not just for their physical body, for durability and flexibility and adaptability, but their minds. So I said, if the tsunami's coming, would you rather be the mighty oak or a reed in that scenario? And they're like, oh, the mighty oak's going to get swept away and the reed was just going to lay down and then pop back up. They said, yeah, in that scenario, I'd rather be the reed. He goes, yeah, but so you got to train for that too. It's actually easy to train to be the mighty oak and go hard, hard, hard. It's harder to train to be soft, especially for men, but it's going to make you stronger. Real strength. And they got it, right? And once they really got that, then they really understood the value of yoga.
Amazing. All right, I've got 5 questions, rapid fire, just whatever feels right. So first one is, what do you think is the one habit, belief, or mindset that's helped you the most with your overall happiness or fulfillment?
To eradicate negative thoughts and conditioning. Back to the story, I know these are rapid fire, but I use that Native American story about feeding the courage wolf. And I use that in my teaching too, to help people understand how important it is to stay positive, because you got 2 wolves in your body. One is the fear wolf who lives in your head, and then you have the courage wolf who lives in your heart. And the one you feed the most is the one that dominates your personality. So if you feed fear, if you've got negative thinking, coulda, shoulda, woulda, can't, won't, not good enough, then you're destroying your self-identity and your sense of worthiness, your sense of self. And then you're actually weakening yourself, and that's going to lead to sickness, injury, or death even. So that was me, because I grew up in a very toxic home, a lot of negative thinking. I had to literally rewire my entire internal representation in language.
What is one thing you do for your health that you think is overlooked or undervalued by others?
I start a practice of box breathing the moment I wake up every single day. In this practice, deep nostril diaphragmatic breathing, 5 count in, 5 count hold, 5 count out, 5 count hold. That alone, I've seen it transform people's lives. If you stick to it, do it every day as a daily practice, ideally 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening, but if not, 20 minutes in the morning. If you can't do 20, do 10. But daily discipline, that alone will transform your life.
All right. What's the most stressful part of your day-to-day life?
My son. We'll have to have a whole conversation on parenting. I don't know if I could add much though.
Yeah, that's
He's a great guy, by the way. Just fantastic. But boy, fun to watch him.
Yeah. Let's see.
He's 26, by the way.
He's 26. Okay.
Unless you think I'm talking about a little kid. No, which is why he's frustrated.
Yes. Yeah. He's old enough, but young enough at the same time.
Right. He's right in that space.
Yeah. My last question, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing men right now?
It all comes back down to identity. I think our culture has really torched public perception, torched men's identity through the conditioning, through social media, through even just languaging, wokeism, whatever, right? Men have been kind of demonized by the feminist movement.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a big cross to bear. And so they overcompensate, right? By thinking they got to be weak and they got to not, project toxic masculinity. And so, but then men who do overboard, then they kind of legitimize this idea that there's toxic masculinity because they're just over the top, right? Wearing it on their sleeve. So it's confusing. There is a real simple solution, and it's exactly what we've talked about in this podcast, is stop believing other people's bullshit and figure out who you are. In fact, you can even say, remember who you are, because there's a part of you that never lost that. It's always there, always present. You've just learned to ignore it. You're looking in the wrong places. You're looking out there for examples of how you should act, or for feedback on how you should act and be. And the answer is not out there, it's in here. So if you want to get back into balance and you want to be a real man, then learn to slow down and sit in stillness and get to know who you really are.
Yeah. I mean, that's been the message that I got from this. It's been very inspiring toward me to remember the importance of a meditation practice.
Yeah.
And breathing. So, well, I thank you for your time.
It's been a lot of fun,
everybody. And we'll have you back on shortly to do that follow-up, which I'm really looking forward to. Is there anything you want to say to people before we sign off?
You know what? We are living the world that we created, right? So if you're not happy with the world, then change it. But you got to change it in your mind first, right? Especially when everyone's all focused on politics and negative news, war. Well, I'm not saying go out and change it out there. I'm saying change what you put in your mind, change the way your mind works, and start to have a much more positive vision of yourself and your future self, and watch the world change around you, because you're the author, right? The producer and the actor in your own little drama. Your world is the only world that you have. There's not one world out there. There's 8 billion worlds from the human perspective. So own your world and create a more beautiful world that you get to play in and have a ball and be a man. A good man.
A good man. All right. Guys,
better man.
A better man. A better human.
Better human.
Yeah. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Again, follow-up episode incoming. Mark, thanks again. Guys, I hope this inspires you to be a better man. I'll see you on the next episode. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. This was one that really inspired me. I'm looking forward to renewing my meditation practice and hopefully achieving the same level, or maybe even just a fraction of the level of mental fortitude and kind of sense of peace that Mark has been able to do on his own. And I hope it inspires you as well. So if you are enjoying this podcast, by the way, I encourage you to leave a review. You can do that on Apple, on Spotify. There's also video versions of the podcast on YouTube and ad-free in the Manful Yoga app and members area. If you have thought about joining Manful Yoga, we do have a free 7-day trial. Go to manfulyoga.com/join to learn more. And if you're not quite ready for the trial, we do have a free 7-day challenge, a pain relief challenge to get you started at manfulyoga.com/7DC. And Manful Yoga is the umbrella brand kind of behind the Better Man podcast. Manful Yoga, if you're not aware, is kind of a fitness-centric approach to yoga for men. And I started the Better Man podcast about 8 years after starting Manful Yoga as a way to complement the physical fitness focus, to address the other aspects of men's health and men's self-improvement. Because ultimately for me, Manful yoga is one method that I focus on self-improvement. And the Better Man podcast is a way for me to explore other aspects of self-improvement as well. So hopefully you're getting something out of this. I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. As always, I hope this inspires you to be a better man. Links for anything Mark Divine related in the description here. All right, guys. See you next time.